Redditors, have you ever gotten an ick from a potential partner or love interest that instantly killed your attraction to them? If so, what happened? First date. I was filling gas and she started going through my phone. I saw her go through it and continue to fill gas as she read my text messages. I'm a fairly open person with little to hide, but I do value trust and honesty. Soon as the pump clicked, she put it back in a hurry. I skipped the dinner plans and dropped her home. If I can't trust you with my phone, I can't trust you with my future. Edit. What happened next? Well, I didn't address it immediately. She didn't know I was driving towards her house until we got super close, at which point we had maybe 2 minutes left together. In a calm and "I'm disappointed in you" tone, I told her I caught her in the act and this blatant breach of privacy was a deal breaker for me. She's too old to be acting like an insecure teenager. She was 26, and that she should address this behavior before pursuing serious relationships. She knew she was in the wrong. She stayed quiet till we got back and left the car without a word. Still no apology though. Story 2. Dated a guy who seemed chill but kept talking about social media and how people/exes were scheming against him. I believed him at first until it got to a point where he thought that things like a photo someone put up was an indicator that they were getting back at him, when these people were literally just doing normal things and posting normal stuff. I think maybe he was schizophrenic, but it was really unsettling. Months later, he rang me out of the blue to ask me about a link between his ex, myself, and a friend. The link was butterflies, and because of this link, he thought we were conspiring against him. Story 3. I went on a date with a seemingly nice guy in my early 20s. It went well, so after dinner we cuddled in the back seat of his car in a quiet country area listening to music. He gently played with my hand and fingers and gave me a little massage, so relaxing. When he got to my wrist, he looked at it, flipped it around a few times, and says in a lustful voice, "It would be so easy for me to break this little thing right now." Edit. I said this in response to someone below for you guys asking about what happened after. It was maybe 2007? I don't remember in detail what happened next. I kinda just played it off like, "Tee-hee, you're so strong," until he took me home. You know, I kinda tried to de-escalate, so I didn't acknowledge that statement too much. Just kept the conversation moving to something else and was careful to not embarrass or upset him. I didn't keep seeing him. I was busy for the next dates he asked me on and then acted as boring as possible until he lost interest in me eventually. He started a relationship with someone else pretty quickly after that. Story 4. First date with a guy who mentioned hooking up that night while I was talking about something else, and I continued speaking to finish my sentence. He immediately asked if I was ignoring him because I didn't stop speaking to acknowledge his inquiry for hooking up. Story 5. Maybe not instantly killed, but a really lovely woman telling me in a sincere voice that she loved me. 3 to 4 hours after meeting her. Freaked me the hell out in a way that I guess could reasonably be described as the ick. In no way was the statement couched either, just straight up, "I love you." I think I responded, "No, you don't." Story 6. Went on a date with a guy I met at a party. He made me prove that I liked Lord of the Rings by answering who said what when he quoted someone. He pulled out a notebook of really poorly drawn anime characters and asked me if he could draw me. He was a lot shorter than me and asked if it bothered me. I said no. Then he said, "Good, I like Amazonian goddesses." He kept trying to put his jewelry onto me despite my protests. He referenced being arrested and made me guess what for, and when I refused to guess for not knowing him well enough, he said GBH. He was a trainee doctor and asked if I'd ever broken any bones. When I replied yes, he said that he was going to look up my x-rays. And the icing on the cake, when I wanted to leave, he got my knee-high boots, slipped them onto my feet, and zipped them up and said, "You should always be treated like a goddess, my Morticia Adams." All in one date. Story 7. Yeah, I went on a date with a girl who seemed perfectly fine. She was really nice and made interesting conversation, clearly cared and put an effort into the date. But then, halfway through, she gets a call on her Bluetooth headset, which I hadn't even noticed beneath her hair. I don't know why, but it turned me off so quickly. It was a coworker calling too, and she started discussing some clearly stressful topic, planning a meeting or something. They got to near arguing and she kept rolling her eyes and sort of half winking at me every time the coworker said something that annoyed her. She ended up saying she had just seen a car crash and she had to run, which weirdly got me back into her a little bit since that's a slick move. But then immediately called another coworker to complain about the first one and kept winking at me. This was all on a Saturday morning, by the way. One of the weirdest dates I've ever been on. Story 8. My brief girlfriend bought me some hair care products before she came over because it was right by her house. In return, I said I would go grocery shopping and make her a nice dinner. I thought this to be an even exchange. That night, I found her looking through my trash for the receipt for the groceries to make sure that the $30 amount she spent on me was equal to the amount I spent on her dinner. Story 9. Literally every single problem she had was someone else's fault. Even when there was proof it was her fault, she would argue nonstop that it had to be someone else's. She got into a car wreck and called insurance over and over again to tell them that it was the other person's fault. Well, they checked the computer in her car because it saved her speed she was going right before the wreck. It told them everything they needed to know, and she still denied it. Story 10. Oh my god, I went on a date with a guy who loved showing how wealthy he was. We went to a carnival, and he was pulling cash out of the ATM as I stood away somewhere close by. He psst me over and was like, "Check it out." He had a whole 4,000 in his account. Then later in the date, he showed me text messages between him and his mother, where he was bragging about me being fat with a PH, and his mom was like, "Get it." Like, what? No. I noped out. He would message me constantly after that. Weird dude. Edit? No, he didn't grow up poor. I did. Yes, 4K isn't a lot to most, but I was 19-20 when this occurred, and like many of you pointed out, 4K is a lot of money to a poor person. That's why I called him wealthy. But the text between him and his mom were the part that weirded me out the most. Guess I should have led with that. Story 11. Met this really charming guy, went back to his apartment one day and nearly threw up from the smell. Turns out he has a dog, but doesn't take it outside to use the bathroom, so it just craps and pees on everything and only the crap gets picked up. Sometimes. And there was a year of buildup. I had taken my shoes off at the door and I deeply regret that. And there's more. Oh, there's more, but that was the grossest of it. Edit, since people are asking about the more, but I'll warn you all, trigger warning for animal neglect because it gets worse. I live in a pretty isolated area, so I started online dating because it was my only reasonable option. I met this guy and it was a long-distance situation. We met up in person a few times and had been talking for months at this point. I had the self-esteem of a shellless snail and he was a manipulative narcissist, so it took me way too long to realize I could do better. But anyway, by the time I'm in his apartment that first time, I'm a few months into this relationship, and I've taken a week off work and flew down to see him. Why do I regret taking my shoes off? Because a few steps in and my socks are already soaked in dog pee. I screamed and yanked them off, stepping barefoot into what I thought would be the sweet relief of clean kitchen tiles, but oh no, it was tacky. The kitchen floor was tacky with dog pee, like stepping in a damn fly trap. He ran and grabbed his vacuum, apologizing profusely while I leapt across the floor back to my shoes. Looking around, I see the edges of the walls near the floor are stained a sickly brown, and there's stuff piled everywhere. I can hardly pay attention though because the smell is making me nauseous. So I end up getting a hotel for the week. I made some excuse about how I wasn't comfortable staying with him yet. Because I didn't have the self-respect to fly home after that, I had the pleasure of discovering more of his unsanitary habits that week. Such as never once washing his sheets because he didn't believe it was necessary, not believing in brushing his teeth because he claimed that plaque was healthy and protected your teeth, he drank an entire 12-pack of Diet Coke in a day, would cook with expired food, he'd leave a pizza sitting out on a table for days eating out of it, and I kid you not, he spent more time burping and farting than not. He never cleaned the apartment, and when the dog peed or crapped, the pee would be left dry and the crap would get scraped up, and whatever was left, well, it would just have to dry as well. And yes, there was buildup across the entire floor from that. He would only eat burgers at restaurants, and anything I got he'd wrinkle his nose at and tell me how gross. But then we get to the dog. He saw a puppy at the pet store one day and fell in love with it. It was an incredibly expensive, purebred cocker. He had a few issues, which I guess was from inbreeding. Severe separation anxiety, paced constantly, and the crazy eyes. Still endearing. He'd follow you around everywhere and look up at you with the zero thoughts look in his eyes. And just the 2 front teeth showing. Endless energy, and he loved everyone. But boyfriend had no clue how to care for him. He'd take him for walks, maybe twice a day if he was lucky, that consisted of nothing more than a 1-minute circle. And he'd leave him alone for a day or 2 at a time while he was working. He didn't train him to do anything at all, and when he misbehaved, obviously because he wasn't trained, he'd have a yardstick at him threateningly, that the dog was terrified of. He never hit him when I was there, but I just knew he was when I wasn't around by the dog's reaction. But it gets worse, like I said. He was manipulative, and he would start hurting the dog to manipulate me and keep me around. He would lock his dog in a tiny dark room for days at a time alone and would tell me how he's going to make him go insane. I snuck into his house one day and took pictures of the tiny room, took screenshots of the texts he'd sent me, but unfortunately he was smart enough to only say most of it in person. Animal control wouldn't do anything about it, so I tried to talk him into letting me adopt the dog. That didn't work, so then I tried taking him to the vet and getting his paperwork, but that didn't work either. He knew that hurting the dog was absolutely crushing me. At that point, I felt like at least removing myself from the picture would take away one reason for him to hurt the dog. So I left, feeling like there was nothing I could do. I still lose sleep thinking about that goofy gap-toothed dog and wishing I could have saved him somehow. Story 12. Went on a date with an outwardly normal girl. We started kissing and getting frisky back at her place, and she started meowing and acting cat-like. It was little mews at first, then leading on to her stopping, licking her fingertips, and grooming her ears. She saw me make a face and questioned why I'd made a face. I just straight up said, "Because you're pretending to be a cat." She said, "Oh, was I? Sometimes it takes over when I'm turned on." We tried again, she mewed again, and I noped out of there pretty quickly after that. Story 13. In college, I was seeing a girl who lived in a student residence with me, but on another floor. She would always talk about how another guy, Tom, on her floor was obsessed with her and would show me texts between them. She said she only talked to him because she's harmless and that they're friends. I never met him. After a week, her ex-friend from high school pulled me aside and told me not to trust her. She said that the girl I was seeing is a notorious liar and that Tom doesn't exist. That she would add her own number in her phone as Tom and would text herself, deleting the sent messages. The only reason her ex-friend knew is because she saw the text message exchange happen in the reflection of a mirror when they were in the same room. I was close with front desk and asked if they could look up the names from that floor. They said sure, and told me that there was no guy named Tom on her floor. I noped out of that real quick. Story 14. She started to set up the relationship in a way that made me her emotional punching bag, to where I was to blame for any bad feelings she had. Nothing I could do or say in those moments could ever help the situation, because that wasn't my purpose in her life. I was the distraction from her own issues she refused to acknowledge. Her extreme moods weren't because of her or her past, but it was because something I said the wrong way, or laid on the clean sheets with a sweaty body. The ick came about when I realized, at 40 years old, that this has always been the pattern in my relationship with women, and it had everything to do with how my mom treated me. She had her own massive trauma from being horribly abused as a child, but used that as a shield to use me as her emotional and physical punching bag when she was in a bad mood. "You're not being abused, I was abused," was a line I heard constantly as she beat me on a regular basis. Once I saw it for what it was, it disgusted me, but it also changed how I handle relationships now. And now I'm happily married for 2 years to a wonderful woman who never does that to me. Story 15. Putrid smell between the legs, insta-no. Played with her phone quite a lot, even when she herself was talking. She was texting/scrolling at the same time. It was kinda skilled, not gonna lie. Didn't seem capable of holding a conversation unless it was about her or her Instagram fame. Chick had maybe a couple hundred followers. Berated a bartender for an honest mistake and demanded she get her money back. Scoffed at a waiter because the food wasn't to her liking. She wanted a juicy steak but ordered well done and wanted 0 pink in the meat. Turned into an argument at the table and she blamed everyone but herself for the order she made. Wouldn't reciprocate foreplay or anything really. Was a pillow princess/dead fish. Smacked her dog. Discovered she was actually mistreating the poor thing, and my boy actually ended up getting her rescued. That was a ride. Yelled at her father over the phone, like berated the poor man. Look, I've got a laundry list, but I'll stop here. As you can probably tell, I've got more L's than W's. People are wild these days. Story 16. I hooked up with a girl who was smoking hot, like way out of my league actually. Met her at a bar and we had a wild one-night stand and I was stoked to go out with her again a couple nights later. Then during drinks and conversation, she started popping off about the Mexicans this and the N-words that, being a total ignorant bigot. It was like someone had slapped me in the face, came out of nowhere. When she sensed my change of mood, she said, "Oh no, you're not a liberal, are you? Let's talk about something else." "No thanks," I said. I paid the tab and told her so long. I don't care how hot you are, racism or bigotry immediately makes you a 1 out of 10. Story 17. Had 2 rounds of dating him because I really liked him. First go round, I brought him home with me after our second date. Definitely planned on sleeping with him. But during foreplay, he went down on me and he was so rough. It was super unenjoyable and borderline painful. I kept telling him over and over to slow down and be gentler, but he just didn't listen. It was like he was just mimicking adult videos he'd watched. Totally killed the mood and my interest in him. him. I told him that I wasn't interested in dating someone who wouldn't listen to my needs and wants in the bedroom. Months later, he hit me up and I agreed to go out with him again. I thought maybe he had considered what I said before. Met him at a great local spot to watch a basketball game. We'd initially connected over a love of the same team. I spent a lot of time getting ready for the date. Looked nice, smelled nice. He shows up after me, and the first thing I notice is that he's dressed rather carelessly. Specifically, he was wearing this old beat-to-crap zip-up hoodie, which is like, but not a deal breaker. Then he sits next to me and we share a quick hug, and bam, that was it. I was done. He stank. He absolutely reeked of cigarettes, and his breath was awful, like he hadn't even brushed his teeth. I still had a good time with him watching the game and eating wings and fries, but it was immediately not a romantic thing for me. It was just watching the game with a buddy. I'm still really disappointed even now because, like I said, I really liked him. He was super sweet and really liked me back. He just didn't seem mature enough to be in an actual relationship. Bummer. Story 18. When I was in my senior year of high school, the son of one of my mom's work friends who was my age was into me. I wasn't as into him, but he seemed nice enough, and I went out on a single date with him. The reason there was no second date? He kept trying to find out if I was still a virgin or not. His reasoning was that if I wasn't, then it wouldn't matter if we banged on the first date. And if I was, he would work for it. I didn't tell him one way or another because it was none of his goddamn business, and his reasoning was utterly pathetic. Never spoke to him again after I called a cab and went home. Story 19. At first, I was interested in her because she seemed really cool and funny, but then it became apparent that literally everything out of her mouth was cool and funny. It was impossible to have a real conversation, even a casual one. Instead, it was constant Arrested Development lines and sarcasm. She replaced the word dollars with doll hairs, which I chuckled at the first time, but she said it every time, like she was trying to earn Reddit karma in real-life conversations. Drove me nuts. Story 20. When I was 16, I awkwardly ended up third-wheeling a really embarrassing date. The dude turned up in a white suit, blue sunglasses, and a trilby. It was so jarring that I started cracking up in the car as we drove past the restaurant entrance. Who shows up to a date looking like a cross between Michael Jackson and Guy Fieri? If he was a nice dude or at least caring, then I guess I could have let that slip, but he would absolutely not stop talking about how he was the best at literally anything and everything. He talked so much that me and my friend had finished our food before he had even started his. The guy kept insisting that he was the best in the world at Guitar Hero and kept showing us screenshots of the leaderboard. Like we cared. I know we were only 16, but it was really embarrassing. Man, I've never felt so much secondhand embarrassment. I don't even know how that guy turned out, but I'm gonna stalk him on Facebook to see if he ever changed. Story 21. Dude was in the bathroom for a while, clearly taking a crap. No biggie. He lived in a weird little apartment where the only sink was in the kitchen. He comes out and doesn't immediately go to wash his hands. I ask him about it. It starts a small argument where he then refuses to wash his hands because he was going to, but then I made him feel like a child, so now he has to make a point. All attraction lost in that very second. So gross. I can't believe I let poop hands touch me. I want to vomit so bad. Hygiene is important, folks, and the little things indicate how you go about the big things. Story 22. Dated this girl for a while, a month or so, and I visited her home once while her family was out of town. It was just a mess and smelled bad because she had a lot of pets. Birds, cats, a micro pig, and some very neglected dogs. The dogs were matted up, smelly, and seeking love and attention. I inquired about the dogs, and she said, "I don't know, they're not mine." When I said goodnight later from the car, she leaned in to kiss me. I just didn't feel connected anymore. I called her later and asked her more about the dogs. They were her father's and he was never around. Her sisters and her didn't care for them. So, after a couple nights, I stole the dogs and took them to a rescue shelter. They're currently with a new loving home and the girl's family never even flinched at them not being there anymore. I broke it off a few weeks later once I knew they were blissfully ignorant to their dogs being gone. She was a sweet girl and liked me a lot. Loads of affection. But I couldn't be with someone who could just ignore some innocent lives that way. Story 23. Not a serious relationship, but a casual hookup. We only knew each other for about 4 months, and he crapped his pants twice in that time period. The first time, I was like, okay, people get sick and things happen, and tried to let it go. But the second time, he texted me to tell me about it and said it happened as he was walking out of the bathroom. It never happened around me, but he would tell me about it and also bring it up in front of my friends. He thought it was very funny and I guess normal for a grown man to do. He also once farted during banging, which I ignored because things happen. But then he proceeded to bring it up right after and wouldn't let the conversation go. He was proud of it. There were so many other issues with him that were red flags, but that was enough for me to nope out.